Imagine you're standing in a used car lot in 1969. On one side, there's a gleaming Plymouth Roadrunner 426 cubic inches of raw American muscle, 0 to 60 in under 6 seconds, enough chrome to blind you on a sunny day. On the other side, there's this thing, a rounded, almost cartoonish little bubble of a car. It takes 27 full seconds to reach 60 miles an hour. A loaded freight truck could blow past it on the interstate. Its tires look like they belong on a bicycle, and yet that little car would still be running when the Roadrunner was long dead and buried. How? How does a vehicle with 57 horsepower, less than a modern garden tractor, become the single best-selling car in all of automotive history? Over 21 million units, produced on 6 continents, still rolling off assembly lines in Mexico decades after every competitor had moved on. That's not a fluke. That's engineering philosophy. And today, we're going to take it apart bolt by bolt. If stories like this are your thing, engineering legends, unlikely heroes, machines that refuse to quit, you're in the right place. Stick around and consider subscribing. We're just getting warmed up. Let's set the scene. 1969. America is deep in the horsepower wars, and nobody's waving the white flag. Chevrolet's 427 big block is pushing out 435 horsepower. Ford's Boss 429 is dominating NASCAR. The average family sedan packs a V8 that drinks gasoline at 8 miles per gallon in city traffic, and nobody seems to care. Because gas costs 35 cents a gallon and bigger is always better. Detroit is building cars the way Rome built coliseums. Massive, imposing, dripping in chrome. Bumpers stretching wider than entire European city cars. Tail fins reaching for the sky. Everything about American automotive culture in that era was about presence, about power, about making sure everyone around you knew. And then, buzzing quietly through all of it, there's the Beetle. No chrome, no fins, no V8, no bragging rights at the stoplight. Just this peculiar little machine doing 65 on the highway while everything else blows past it. But here's the thing, the people driving those Beetles, they weren't embarrassed, they were smiling. Because they knew something the muscle car crowd didn't. While the Roadrunner's engine would be gasping for a rebuild somewhere around 80,000 miles, that air-cooled 4-cylinder bug was going to keep turning over at 200,000. Quietly, stubbornly, refusing to give up. The Volkswagen Beetle wasn't a car that tried to beat you in a race. It was a car that tried to outlive you. And it usually succeeded. To really understand why this car was the way it was, you have to go back to where it came from. And the story is a strange one. The year is 1934. Adolf Hitler, newly in power, has a vision. A car for the German people. Affordable enough for an ordinary family. Capable of carrying 2 adults and 3 children at highway speeds. Costing no more than 1,000 Reichsmarks. He hands the brief to Ferdinand Porsche. Yes, that Porsche. And the instruction is essentially, make it simple. Make it cheap. Make it work. What Porsche designed was radical in its restraint. Strip away everything that isn't necessary. Use the most durable form of every component. Build it so that ordinary people, not trained mechanics, could keep it running. By the time that design reached 1969, it had been refined, but never reinvented. The bones were the same. And that continuity of philosophy is exactly what made it extraordinary. Here's the question worth sitting with for a second. In an era when every other manufacturer was racing to add more power, more features, more size, what made Volkswagen double down on less? The answer is simpler than you'd think. They looked at what drivers actually needed, not what they wanted on a test drive. What they needed over 10 years of daily use. And Volkswagen's American advertising agency, Doyle Dane Bernbach, turned that philosophy into one of the most famous ad campaigns in history. Think small. The billboards read. While Detroit was shouting louder every year, Volkswagen was whispering, and somehow, everyone heard them. Let's get into the engineering. Because this is where the Beetle story gets genuinely fascinating. The heart of the 1969 model was a 1,500cc flat-4 engine, air-cooled, horizontally opposed cylinders, a single-barrel Solex carburetor, push-rod valves, maximum power at 4,000 revolutions per minute, all 57 horses of it, peak torque of 82.5 pound-feet, arriving at 2,800 revolutions per minute. The whole thing weighed 280 pounds. On paper, it's almost laughably modest. But here's the detail that changes everything. That engine was essentially two motorcycle engines joined at a shared crankshaft. Each cylinder was its own independent unit, its own cooling fins, its own head, its own exhaust port. If one cylinder failed completely, you could unbolt it, set it aside, and actually drive on 3 cylinders to get to a parts store. That's not an accident. That's intentional redundancy baked into the architecture. The crankcase was cast from magnesium alloy to aircraft-grade specifications. The crankshaft was forged steel, balanced to tolerances that American manufacturers reserved for race engines. The connecting rods were shot-peened for fatigue resistance. And before any engine left the factory, every single one was run at full load for 20 minutes on a test stand. Every one, not a sample. All of them. But the real genius was the cooling system. Or rather, the near-total absence of one. No radiator, no water pump, no coolant hoses, no thermostat, no antifreeze, no head gaskets waiting to fail. Just a belt-driven fan bolted directly to the generator, which was bolted to the crankshaft, pushing air over finned aluminum cylinders. One belt, that's the entire thermal management system. In Minnesota, winters at -30 degrees, it warmed up in minutes. In Arizona, summers at 115 degrees, it stayed cool as long as you were moving. The only real weakness was prolonged stop-and-go traffic in extreme heat, and even then, the fix was pull over, wait 10 minutes, drive on. Now here's something that tells you everything about Volkswagen's priorities. The 1969 model used a 1,500cc engine, actually smaller than the 1,600cc unit offered the year before. Why would they shrink the engine during the height of the horsepower wars? Because the smaller displacement ran cooler, stressed components less, and lasted longer. They went backwards in power to go forwards in reliability. Name another manufacturer in 1969 who would have made that call. The engine was just the beginning. The 4-speed manual transmission was synchronized on every forward gear unusual for the era. Gear ratios weren't chosen for acceleration. They were chosen so that the components would never be working harder than necessary. The transmission held 2.5 pints of hypoid gear oil, changed every 30,000 miles. No torque converter, no valve bodies, no planetary gears. Just straight-cut gears swimming in oil. The suspension was equally elegant in its simplicity. Up front, twin trailing arms attached to torsion bars, no springs, no shock towers. The bars themselves were rated for 1 million compression cycles. Rear, independent swing axles with torsion bars giving nearly 8 inches of wheel travel. The whole system was virtually indestructible. Most Beetles would rust away from the outside before the suspension components ever wore out. And about that rust, Volkswagen's paint process in 1969 involved 7 distinct stages: phosphate treatment, primer, color coat, clear coat, with oven curing between each application. The final paint thickness was 120 microns, twice what American manufacturers were applying. Every panel was painted on both sides before assembly. The electrical system ran on 12 volts with a 30-amp generator. The entire wiring harness contained 47 wires. A modern vehicle has over 1,500. There were 8 fuses in the fuse box. The ignition system was points, condenser, 1 coil, 1 distributor, 4 spark plugs. You could completely rebuild the electronics for under $100 using a test light and basic hand tools. And notice what wasn't on the car. No power steering. It weighed 1,800 pounds. You didn't need it. No power brakes. No air conditioning in most models. The heater was literally just heat exchangers wrapped around the exhaust pipes with a cable-operated air flap. Open it, warm air comes in. Close it, it doesn't. Elegant. Impossible to fail. Consumer Reports tested the 1969 Beetle. 0 to 60, 27 seconds. Quarter mile, 21.5 seconds at 62 miles per hour. Top speed, 78 miles per hour with a good tailwind. 65 into a headwind. City fuel economy, 25 mpg. Highway, 33 mpg. Range, on the 10.6-gallon tank, over 300 miles. Those numbers weren't impressive in 1969. They're still not impressive today. But here are the numbers that do matter. A service loaner Beetle at a dealership in Indiana called Old Faithful accumulated 562,000 miles on its original engine. No rebuild, just maintenance. When they finally retired it, compression readings were still within factory specification. A California owner drove daily from Los Angeles to San Diego and back, putting 350,000 miles on the car. Original clutch. Original transmission. Wear items only. Tires, brakes, battery, generator. How do you get there? Mechanical tolerance stacking. Every single component was overbuilt to at least double its working load. The crankshaft was rated for 150 horsepower and asked to handle 57. The transmission was rated for 200 pound-feet of torque and never saw more than 82.5. The cylinder walls were thick enough to be bored out 3 times. Most Beetles never needed it once. Everything ran at roughly half its design limit, all the time. Would you have bought this car in 1969, knowing these numbers? Or would the 2.7, second 0 to 60, have been a deal breaker? It's worth thinking about, because a lot of people made the right call. 524,025 Beetles were sold in the United States in 1969 alone. That's 1,438 cars every single day. Dealers had 6-week waiting lists on cars they hadn't built yet. Ships loaded 2,000 Beetles a day at the port of Emden, headed for American shores, and the people buying them weren't one demographic. That's what made the Beetle genuinely strange as a cultural phenomenon. College students loved it because it was cheap. Families loved it because it never broke down. Hippies embraced it as a rejection of American excess. Conservatives bought it for pure economic sense. It was counterculture and mainstream at the exact same moment, and no car before or since has managed that particular trick. The competition scrambled to respond. AMC launched the Gremlin specifically to take on the Beetle. It failed. GM built the Vega. It was rusting before the warranty ran out. The Ford Pinto became famous for entirely different, darker reasons. Nobody could replicate that combination of character, economy, and mechanical immortality. Even Ralph Nader, who had successfully dismantled the Corvair's reputation in unsafe at any speed, took a swing at the Beetle. His conclusion? The car was effectively unsafe above 55 miles per hour. It was, in its own way, a backhanded endorsement. The car couldn't go fast enough to seriously hurt anyone, and its low center of gravity made it surprisingly survivable in crashes, despite having no crumple zones whatsoever. Here's where the story shifts from history to philosophy. The Wolfsburg factory employed 45,000 workers, producing 4,000 cars per day in 1969. Every vehicle passed through 189 inspection points. The final check involved running each car at full throttle on a dynamometer, checking for leaks, vibrations, and unusual sounds. Vehicles that failed went back to be rebuilt. The failure rate? 0.3%. Detroit's average at the time? 3%. A new Beetle in 1969 cost $1,799. Insurance was 40% cheaper than comparable American cars because insurers knew it couldn't get into serious trouble at 78 miles per hour. A replacement engine was $300. A clutch was $25. A transmission was $150. The shop manual was 68 pages long. A Chevrolet's was $800. You could train a mechanic specifically on Beetles in a week. The manufacturing innovations Volkswagen pioneered during this era: statistical process control, supplier partnership programs, continuous improvement protocols were things the world would later attribute to Japanese manufacturing in the 1980s. Volkswagen was doing them in 1969. They just didn't have the marketing. Today, a clean 1,969 Beetle sells for $15,000 to $25,000. Fully restored examples push $30,000, appreciating at more than 3 times the rate of inflation since new. Companies still manufacture every single mechanical component. You could build a complete, brand new 1,969 Beetle entirely from catalog parts. And the spiritual descendants are everywhere. The Toyota Corolla, the Honda Civic, the Mercedes philosophy of engineering that outlasts its price tag. Every one of them, in some measurable way, owes a debt to the engineers who chose longevity over power during the most power-obsessed era in automotive history. In 1969, Volkswagen's engineers had options they didn't use. A more powerful engine was already in development. Racing versions were running wider tires. Porsche had already demonstrated what the platform could do with proper aerodynamics. They could have chased the American market on its own terms. They didn't. They kept building the car that couldn't kill itself, in an era when everything around them was getting louder, faster, and more complicated. That took a particular kind of courage. The courage to believe that doing one thing right was worth more than doing 10 things impressively. 50 years later, there are more 1,969 Beetles on the road than 1,969 Corvettes. Let that settle for a moment. Where are you watching this from? Because I genuinely want to know, does anyone in your family have a Beetle story? A grandparent who swore by one? A dorm room road trip that only made it because nothing broke? Drop it in the comments. These cars touched something in people that statistics don't fully capture. The lesson the Beetle leaves for every engineer, every designer, every builder today isn't build a simpler car. You can't replicate 1,969. The lesson is this: figure out what actually matters to the people who will use what you're making, and then optimize for that, ruthlessly, even when the market is shouting at you to do something else entirely. Volkswagen decided that reliability mattered more than anything else. 50 years of sales figures and 562,000-mile odometers proved them right. The tortoise always beats the hare. It just takes patience to watch it happen. If this kind of deep dive into engineering and the stories behind iconic machines is something you want more of, we have a lot more coming. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Leave a comment with your Beetle story, your thoughts, or even just the country you're watching from. Until next time, keep asking why things work the way they do. The answers are almost always more interesting than you expect.